Good morning, kids, or good afternoon, or good evening. Here we are again. This is like the 5th week we've done this. I'm really starting to miss you guys. Hope we can get back together soon. Still don't know when that's going to be. We're going to find out. But we will be together as soon as we can, and then you can say good morning, Mr. Guyman, back to me when I say good morning, kids, on a Sunday morning. But we're back to our lessons now. And if you can remember what we've been doing, we're talking about the country of Israel, God's special country with the Jews, God's special people, and we had been through different ones of his kings, and we saw where the kingdom split apart right after the third king. And the one kingdom, the northern kingdom, never had a good king. The southern kingdom went on a little bit longer because it did have some good kings, some bad kings, some kings that started out good, some kings that went bad. We've looked at those, and now we've been looking at a couple of prophets. Besides a king, God would have guys that would go around and try and lead people back to him. Now, we talked about it before when we were talking about that wicked king Ahab. They were actually trying to kill these prophets. And we meet our first prophet already in the previous lessons. His name was Elijah. All right? What does that mean? Well, the E-L-I part, that means God. You could also say my God, right? If you remember when Jesus was on the cross, back when he was in total agony, and when he had to be separated from God, what did he say? He said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? But if we go back into the Hebrew, the way he said it there, instead of in our English, he said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And those two Eli's on the front, he was saying, my God. Okay? Eli, God. And Jah. What does the Jah mean? In this case, it's standing for Jehovah, which is one of the special names for God. Matter of fact, this name is so special that the Hebrew priest and the Hebrew guys that would copy the Bible, they would not say that name out loud because they thought it was so holy. If they wrote it when they were copying it, they'd get a new pen because they thought it was such a holy name for God. They didn't want to defame it in any way. All right? This is the one guy we've been talking about. What are some of the things we've seen him do? Think for a while. Our last couple of lessons, what are some of the things he did? Are you thinking? Got it figured out? Remember any of them? All right, let me jog your memory. All right? One of the first things he did was pray to God and stop the rain. He had to go to the king first, wicked King Ahab there, tell him, you people have been so bad, you've been worshiping this false god, and I'm going to prove I'm the true God, and it's not going to rain here until I say it's going to rain again. That's what Elijah did. All right. That was one thing. That took a lot of guts. And while he was there without any rain, God took care of him. We saw him go to a brook. He got water from the brook, but do you remember how he got fed? How did God feed him? Yeah. If you remember, he had those birds, the ravens, came flying in and brought him meat. You know, air delivery service. Maybe a forerunner of Amazon drones. You never know. That's how he got his food until the brook dried up. And then he moved to a widow's house. And how did God take care of him there? You remember the barrel I had that had the flour in it? She thought she only had enough flour to feed her and her son one more time and enough oil to cook it one more time. But Elijah stayed there for the rest of those 3 years. And you know what? Every day she was able to get flour out of that barrel. She was able to get oil out of her little oil jar. And she was able to cook another meal for them. Quite a miracle in itself right there. Remember another thing he did, the big one, the thing everybody talks about when they talk about Elijah. That's when he went up to the top of Mount Carmel and he challenged the false prophets of the false god. And they put up their altar with their sacrifice, and they danced around and yelled and screamed and cut themselves and carried on the way they thought their God wanted them to worship them. Nothing happened. What did Elijah do? He built his own altar, put his own sacrifice on it, had him douse it with water 3 times till it was soaking wet. He prays one little prayer. God sends fire down from heaven, burns up the sacrifice, the wood. even the stones and all the water. That's one of the things people remember Elijah for. We also remember him, what page is here? For running away from Queen Jezebel right after that. And him going up on the mountain and God talking to him and making him remember that God was still in control. First, God sent a high wind. He sent a fire. He sent an earthquake. And he didn't really speak to Elijah in those. He talked to him through a still small voice. Remember, the one point of that thing was, he said, there's still 7,000 people left that are worshiping me and not worshiping that false god. You're not the last one left, like Elijah thought he was. And then he told him to do 3 things. Do you remember what those were? So up on the mountain, God spoke to him, and he told him to do 3 things. 3 people he was supposed to go out and anoint. Well, let's read it. I hope you got your Bibles, because we use our Bibles here, because our stories come right out of there. And we need to go to 1 Kings, all right? Old Testament book, 1 Kings. And we need to go to chapter 19. All right? It's kind of close to the end of 1 Kings and the beginning of 2 Kings. In fact, we're going to be in end of 1 Kings and the beginning of 2 Kings today. But right now, we need chapter 19. All right? Hopefully you're there. 1 Kings chapter 19. And we are going to look at what he was told to do in verses 15 and 16. All right? Here we go. And the Lord said unto him, Go, return on thy way in the wilderness of Damascus, and when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. That's one thing you're supposed to do. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, shall thou anoint to be king over Israel. There's the second one. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat, of, Abel Meth-Olan, shalt thou anoint to be prophet in thy room. So he's supposed to anoint 3 people to different jobs. And the last one was the guy to replace him. And if you remember last week's lesson, we read that, and we didn't go into that too much because we looked and see what happened to wicked King Ahab and wicked King Jezebel. We're going to come back today and see how Elisha did these things, especially that last one with the new prophet. Okay? So we're going to pick up here right in verse 19. So 1 Kings 19:19. All right? Here's a verse for you. So he departed thence and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yokes of oxen before him, and with the 12th, he was with the 12th, and Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him. All right? Well, let's back up here. This guy's name that he's going to go to is Elisha. All right? This is why it's so confusing. Everybody gets these 2 names mixed up. If you listen real close to me teaching today, I might get them mixed up, even though I'm trying hard not to, all right? Okay. Again, his name starts with Eli. What do we say that meant up here? Remember? That means God, or my God. And then his name has the Shah at the end. Elisha, which means salvation. My God is salvation. That's what his name means. Now, I'm going to give you an extra little help today to help you remember which one of these guys came first and which one of these came second. Okay? Are you going to get this down? Yep. All right. You see their names all start with Eli. So the first 3 letters on both of them are the same. But if we go to the 4th letter, we have a J and we have an S. And if you say your ABCs right, the letter J comes before the letter S. And that way you can remember that Elijah came before Elisha. Okay, now that we learned his name, let's look again and see what he was doing. All right? Okay, we have his name there. Who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him. I mean, this must have been quite an impressive rig. 12 different cattle hooked up to a plow. And I don't know if this was a multi-bottom plow. It must have been quite a thing. You know, the young guys buy their sports cars and they're so proud of them and they put all their stuff on them and they customize them and they think they're really something, all right? And I suppose if you're a farmer and you get your first new tractor, it must be really exciting too, all right? But here he had this exciting rig, 12 yoke of oxen he was plowing the field with that day. And then we saw what happened. Elijah came by and cast his mantle upon him. Now, mantle was what they used for a coat back then. Since they walked around a lot, they had to keep their coat with them, so they had ways they could roll it up and put it over their shoulder. And if they got cold, they could wrap it around them and stay warm. So Elijah came by to where Elisha was, and he throws his coat on him. Whoop. All right? I imagine it landed on him like this. Well, I'm not quite sure. Seems kind of strange, doesn't it? Throwing your coat on somebody. You ever had somebody throw a coat on you? No. But back then they knew what it meant. Especially Elisha knew what Elijah meant. It meant that he's going to be the one that's going to take over. So it sounds like Elijah and Elisha might have known each other before this, because he knew right where to go when God told him to do this. And he now got Elijah's coat on him. And he knew that meant something. And it's kind of like Elijah walked off, and Elisha comes running along behind him then, catches up with him and says, wait, I'm coming with you, but let me say goodbye to my mother and father first. And Elijah said, yes, you can do that. All right? So he went there, he said goodbye to his parents, and then he did something that seems so totally strange until you really think it through. And we're going to read about that here in verse 21, all right? So back to 1 Kings 19, verse 21. And he returned back from him, and he took the 12 yoke of oxen, and slew them, and boiled their flesh in the instruments of the oxen, and gave unto the people that they did eat. And he arose and went after Elijah, and ministered unto him. So what did he do with those 12 oxen? Yeah, he killed them. He took their yokes, because back then they put a board, across two of them with a thing underneath, stick the oxen's head in there, and then they'd hook those all up to the big long bar that went between them. He burnt all that to cook them. He cooks this feast, and he serves it to all the people that were helping him plow that day. Why would he do that? Seems kind of strange. Be like taking and setting your car on fire. Why did he do that? Got a guess? Well, he knew he wasn't coming back. His plan was to go on and serve and be with Elijah until it was his turn to take over. And he knew he wasn't coming back. He gave up quite a lot that day, besides just his oxen and his fancy plow. He knew that at this point he wouldn't be the kid that grows up and takes over the family farm. We don't know if he ever got married because he was busy following Elisha. All right? A lot of things he gave up that day, and he did it willingly just so he could follow God and do what God wanted him to do. And as far as he was concerned, if Elisha came along to him and told him that he was going to be the next great prophet, he believed him. It was much as God said it himself, and that's what he was going to do. Now this starts something for the next 20 years. There are people that like to go through the Bible and put dates together and figure things out. And they tell us for about 20 years, Elisha followed Elijah around and did whatever Elijah wanted him to do. And while he was doing that, he was learning how to be a prophet. He was taking notes. He was helping Elijah out on what he needed. Meeting with the people. Going where Elijah went. And he learned a lot like that. Have we ever seen that before in the Bible? Somebody that was learning from somebody else? You thinking of it? Well, if you remember Moses, we have a lot in there that talks about Moses and his brother Aaron. But Moses had somebody with him most the whole time he was leading named Joshua. And what happened to Joshua? Well, when Moses died, he went up on the mountain and died, then Joshua took over. Joshua was the one that led him into the land to take over that land. And we see the same thing here. You might call him a sidekick, Elisha was Elijah's sidekick. Another term you might use is a protege, someone that's in training to take over. Yep. And that's what he did there for 20 years. So we're going to jump ahead 20 years. We're going to jump out of the book of 1 Kings. We're going to jump into the book of 2 Kings and look at some things that happened over there. Somehow Elijah knew that his time was coming to an end. But he told him that God had sent him over to the land of Jordan, which meant he has to cross the Jordan River, all right? I'm thinking Elijah was around up in here, all right? Up over here. And if you remember, the Jordan River is this river that comes from the top, the Sea of Galilee, down to the Dead Sea. This is the sea that Jesus calmed when he was on the boat. It came through here. This is the Jordan River. It's the same river that Joshua, when he was leading the people across, God split the river and they walked across. That same river, the Jordan River, it might have been a different spot on the river, but that same river there is what Elijah had to go across. He told Elisha he could stay behind, but Elisha didn't want to do that. He wanted to do whatever he could to learn from Elijah. So he said, I'm going to follow you. I'm not going to leave you behind or be left behind. I'm going to go with you. So they went on, and this is one of the things that happened. Let's take a look here. 2 Kings chapter 2. All right. Hopefully you're with me. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 8. And they arose. That's 1 Kings. Here we go. And Elijah took his mantle and wrapped it together and smote the waters that were divided hither and thither, so that the two of them went across on dry ground. How's that for a way to cross a river? So when they got there, Elijah took his coat off. Somehow he folded it together, and then he smacked the river. And what happened? The river split. Now rivers, flow one way or another. So maybe it started to back up on one side and it drained out here. And the Bible says they went across on dry ground. They got over. The river started flowing again. There was a miracle for you. Don't see that happen every day. It would be convenient if we could do that, getting across rivers, because they're kind of complicated to get across if you don't have a bridge. All right. They get on the other side, and Elijah asked Elisha a question. How would you like someone to ask you this question, all right? We're going to read it. It's in verse 9, all right? Still in 2 Kings chapter 2, we're going to read verse 9. And it came to pass when they were gone over that Elisha asked, I'll try that again, that Elijah said unto Elisha, ask what I shall do for thee before I am taken away from thee. Stop right there. What was the question? He said, what is it you want? What can I do for you? That's quite a question. All right? Now, if we remember somebody else in the Bible that got asked a question like that, yeah, the third king, King Solomon, God offered him, said, anything you want, I'm so pleased with you. Whatever you want, I'll do it for you. If you want to be the richest king ever, I'll let you be that. If you want to be the most powerful king ever, I'll let you do that. If you want to have great health, I'll let you do that. And what did Solomon ask for then? He said, well, I need the wisdom to run this kingdom. I don't know how to do it. I need your wisdom to do that. And God made him the wisest man that ever was, and then he threw in some great riches at the same time. So King Solomon was the richest king they ever had, too. Quite a deal. Here we have, Elisha gets about the same question. What do you want? Is there something special I can do for you? All right? How would you answer that question? Someone says, what special thing you want me to do for you? What special thing can God do for you? And I'll have him do it. Let's see what he said. And he said, right back up there where we left off, and Elisha said, I pray thee, let a double portion of thy spirit be upon me. So what's he asking for? He says, I want to be twice as close to God as you are. I want God to use me twice as much. I want to be twice as powerful as you are. That was quite a deal when you think you're talking about Elijah, because he had done some great things already. And Elisha said, yeah, I want twice as much. I want to be the greatest prophet God ever had. Give me twice as much. And Elijah, see, make a mistake. Elijah said, yeah, I'll let you do that, but you got to be with me when I'm taken away. So after that, Elisha stayed right with them. But it wasn't very long. They walked a little bit more. They talked a little bit more. And let's read what happened. Here's another thing that doesn't happen very often, all right? We're going to go over to verse 11. All right? Again, 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11. And it came to pass, they still went on, and they talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, that parted them both asunder, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind unto heaven. So this would be quite a scene to see. They're walking down the road, talking to each other, like they'd been doing for the last 20 years. Elisha's learning what he can from Elijah, and Elijah's telling him great things. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes this chariot. But it's not made like a normal chariot. It doesn't have horses like a normal chariot. The whole thing's on fire, including the horses. Now, we always picture this thing coming down from the sky. Maybe it came down the road. But it came driving down there so much that Elijah had to jump to one side. And Elisha had to jump over to the other side so they wouldn't be hit. All right? And then look what happens. And then the whirlwind came up and sucked Elijah up into the heavens. So now, and when he did that, his mantle, his coat, fell off from him. Now Elisha weeps. It says he ripped his clothes, which is what they did back then when they were really sad and grieving like this. But after he does that for a while, he picks back up Elijah's coat. He puts it on him. And he starts walking back home. But to get back home, what does he have to do again? He has to get back across the river. How's he do that? Well, he did it the exact same way Elijah did. He took his coat off. He folded it up. He smacks the river. And the river parts. Dry ground on the bottom again. He walks across. And it so happened when he did that, there was a group of guys that saw him do that. Now, what group was this? Well, they're called the sons of the prophets. It's kind of like they had this prophet school going for them. Elijah was training other guys on how to be prophets, how to tell people about God, how to lead people to God, how to show them how great God is, and the things they can do to help other people out as they do that. A school for ministry is like when our pastors go off to schools now to learn how to be pastors. All right? They were doing that, and some of those guys, probably a good number of them, saw Elisha do exactly what Elijah had done. And they knew, okay, Elisha is now the new prophet. He's the new head prophet around here. We're going to pay attention to him like Elijah did. But they said, hey, when Elijah told them what happened, let us go and look for him. Elisha said, well, you're not going to find him. God took him away. But he let him go look. So it was 50 men went out and searched for Elijah for 3 days, and they couldn't find him. God had taken him away. All right? So there we saw how Elisha replaced Elijah. God had told Elijah to select Elisha. Elisha follows him around for 20 years. And then God takes Elijah home without dying. And then Elisha takes over. Who else have we seen go to heaven without dying first? Do you remember? You have to think way back in our earlier lessons. Matter of fact, some of the younger ones of you haven't even heard it yet. All right? But there was a guy named Enoch. Back in the Old Testament, we were talking about the descendants of Noah, and he had such a relationship with God that one day God just took him home. All right? And we've seen Elisha take over now. All right? And remember what he asked for. What did he ask for? What was it? That double portion. Now, we don't know exactly how all that worked out and what kind of preaching he did and what his ministry was like. But when we look in our Bibles and count up the number of miracles Elijah did And the number that Elisha did, he did about twice as many more. Just like he had asked for and just like he was promised. Matter of fact, we're going to look at a couple of those miracles today. All right, there's a lot we could look at. We're going to look at two. All right, and the first one has to do with one of those sons of the prophets. Some of those sons of the prophets were married, and we had one that was married. Move some things over. He was married and he had two small boys, maybe around the ages of some of you. All right? He was there in the prophet school doing what he was doing, trying to learn. He probably had some other jobs too or something because he had to take care of his wife and his family. And for some reason, we don't know why, he had to borrow some money. All right? Now, maybe your parents have done this. If you want to buy a house, you probably don't have enough money to buy a house when you first start to buy one. Especially the young people. They're just married, just having kids when they're younger. They don't have the money to buy a house usually. What do they have to do? Well, they borrow the money to buy the house. Some people will borrow money to buy a car because they can't afford a new car right now. But they want to get the money to do it. So they borrow the money to do the car. Now, in these days, when you borrow money to buy a house, and when you borrow money to buy a car, and when you sign all those papers they give you to sign, in there it says that if you don't keep making the payments, paying the people back you borrowed the money for, they will come along and they will take the house or they will take the car if you can't make the payments anymore. All right? Well, they had something like that in the Old Testament too, and we don't know what he borrowed this money for, but back then, if you couldn't pay your debts, one of the things the person could legally do was then take your children and sell them for slaves. So even though this guy was dead, his wife was still responsible for this. She couldn't work like that. She couldn't make the money. She was in big trouble, and the guy was about ready to come along, the guy that they borrowed the money from, and take her two sons, and he would sell them for slaves to try and recover his debt. She didn't know what to do about it. And she went to Elisha to ask him. Let's look at what Elisha says here in verse 4, or chapter 4. So we got to jump ahead 2 chapters. 2 Kings chapter 4. Okay? You there? We're going to go to verse 3. Here's some strange instructions on how to solve this problem. Then he said, "Go, borrow thee vessels abroad from thy neighbors, even empty vessels, and borrow not a few." Okay, so he says, go borrow all the pots and jars you can from all your friends and neighbors. Step 1. "And when thou art come in, shut thy door upon thee and their sons." Step 2. Go home with all these borrowed pots and jars and whatever they had. Close the door. All right. Step 3. "And thou shalt pour out unto all the vessels, and thou shalt set aside that which is full." Okay? So this is what she does. She goes home, and the only thing she had of value in her home was her oil. And if you remember, we talked about this a while ago. Oil was pretty important back then. They would get this oil from olives and other plants they could get oil from. It was a lot like our vegetable oil. If you're thinking the kind of oil your dad puts in the car, you're totally off. All right? Vegetable oil of some sort. All right? And they would use it to cook with. They'd have to pour it in their pan to make the stuff cook better. You know, maybe your mother has one of those spray cans she sprays the pan with before she cooks. Well, they used oil instead. They would use oil more like we use butter to make things taste better because their bread was kind of dry. All right? And she only had a little bit. But that was about the only thing she had in house that was value. And she borrowed jars, okay? Now, I have a glass one of these things because that's what I have at home. Hers would have been like a ceramic pot. And the stuff she borrowed wouldn't be like the glass things I brought here today because this is what I have around my house. She would have borrowed clay pots lightly, okay? So they set up what looks like a production line. She takes her oil jug. And she says, "This is ridiculous. This thing is bigger than this." And she starts pouring. She pours, and she pours, and she pours, and she pours, and she pours. And then this one gets full. Okay, so they set that one aside. We're running out of room here. Their boys bring her the next one. Well, there's still oil in there. Doesn't look any different than it did before. And she pours again. Pour, 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 pour. And it gets full and gets full and gets full and gets full. And then this one's full again. Like, how's that happen? This is bigger than this. But she puts that one down. Her boys bring her some more. Another one. Pour, 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 pour. This one gets full again. Now she's got 3 jars that were bigger than the one she started with, and they're full of oil. How's that work? And they keep doing that. And doing that. Her boys would bring her another one. Gets full. Still oil in there. They'd bring her another one. Pour, pour, pour. This one's really big. Pour, pour, pour. Still taking more. Pour, pour, pour. I mean, how many of these do you think would fit into here? But this is the kind of stuff that was happening. She was pouring up more jars than she started with that were a whole lot bigger than what she started with. And at the end of the day, they had all these jars. She finally told the boys, bring me another jar. I think I still got oil in here. And she did that while she was pouring the last one. And the boy said, we don't have any more, Mom. We've used them all up. Everything we got is full. And as soon as they said that and this last one was full, the oil stopped coming out. All right. So then she went back. She told Elisha what happened. He told her, take all those jars that you borrowed from your neighbors, go out and sell the oil. So they go to one house. You want some oil? Yeah. You got a good price? Yeah, it's so much. I don't know how much the fair price was. And they pour some out for that person, and they go to the next place. Do you want some oil? Yeah, we take some oil. How much is it? And they say, oh, it's this much. Okay, well, here, have some. And they pour it out. And they sold all the oil that they had gotten from their itty-bitty little jar to start with. And it was enough money to pay back the money her husband borrowed when he was alive. And it was enough money for them to live on, at least for a while. So that was the first miracle here. I have a picture of it. Right there, there she is filling her pot with that little tiny one. Here's one of her boys that finally says, up, we're full, we don't have any more room. All right, that was the one miracle. We saw Elisha helping them out. Let's look at the next one, all right? Now, Elisha was a prophet, and every once in a while, God would go tell him to tell somebody something. We saw that with Elijah. He got sent to King Ahab several times. He would travel around, and he'd have to stay different places, and there was this one woman in another town that when he came through started cooking him meals. And after a while, she said to her husband, you know, he comes through here every time. He's such a good man of God. We'd like to do something for him. And up in the top of their house, they built him a little apartment. It had a bed in it. It had a table. It had a chair. Okay? He'd stop in there when he wanted to. Anytime he wanted to, stop in. Kind of like a bed and breakfast. All right? He'd stop in on his travels. And he said, I'd like to do something for those people. And he was talking to his servant. He said, what can I do for him? And the servant said, well, she doesn't have a son. And her husband is old. Because back then, sometimes an old man would marry a younger woman, especially if it was the second time he got married or third time he got married. And she hadn't had any kids. So when her husband died and she couldn't take care of the place, who was going to take care of her? One of those problems. Said if we gave her a son, but her husband's so old he can't make sons anymore, how are we going to get a son? Well, Elisha had a miracle happen again. And within a year, after he told her, she had a son. The son grows up. Now, where have we heard of a baby being born that was almost impossible to be born? Thinking again, there was a son. Abraham and Sarah had a son when they were very old. Most people would have thought it would be impossible for them to have a child. They named his name Isaac. This is the same type of thing happening here, all right? The kid grew up, he got maybe your age or so, where he could go out in the field sometimes and help his dad. And he was out there one day and he starts complaining about this terrible headache. I don't know if you ever had a headache. I've had headaches where it felt like someone hit me over the head with a board, okay? They're really painful and sometimes they just leave you. You can't do anything but sit there in pain. And he was crying and carrying on that his head hurt. And his father took one of the servants, had his servants take him home. They took the boy home. He was sitting in his mother's lap. I mean, his mother couldn't give him an aspirin or anything. And he dies in his mother's lap as she's holding him because of this headache. Well, this lady knew what to do. First thing she did was take the dead son up to the prophet's room, lay him on the bed, and then she gets one of the servants and they ride off to find Elisha and say, hey, you gave me the son. I didn't really ask for him, but it was such a blessing when you gave me, and now he's dead. And Elisha says, well, we'll go see him. And matter of fact, he sends his servant ahead of him, because the servant could go faster, with his staff, his walking stick, says, lay this across the child when you get there. So a servant runs ahead, gets to his room, lays that walking stick across. Nothing happens. Finally, Elisha and his mother, the son's mother, get there. Elisha goes into the room by himself, closes the door. He prays some. And let's look at one of the first verses. We're going to go to 2 Kings 4, verse 33. All right, you were in 2 Kings 4 before. We're going to jump ahead to verse 33. All right. He went in therefore and shut the door in twain, and he prayed to the Lord. And we're going to read verse 34. And he went up and lay upon the child and put his mouth to his mouth and his eyes upon his eyes. And he stretched himself on the child, and the flesh of the child got warm. Because you know when you die, your body starts getting cold. When you're alive, your heart's pumping, and you're burning some of the energy in your body, and you're keeping your body warm, because we're warm-blooded creatures. It started to get warm. So the boy was laying on his bed. It's kind of like he took one hand here, one hand here. He put his face forward on the boy's face, so his eyes lined up and his mouth lined up. And he did that, and the boy got warm, but yet he's still kind of dead. So Elisha paces around for a while, and he comes back again in verse 35. And when he returned, he walked into the house, walking to and fro, and went up and stretched himself upon the child, and the child sneezed 7 times. All right, achoo, 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 and he got up, and he was fine. And Elisha takes him down to his mother, who was so happy to see him. And that's the second miracle we see. I have a picture of that here. There's a mother holding her boy that was dead. Another miracle. It wasn't that, mouth-to-mouth resuscitation healed him. It was another miracle that God did to bring a dead boy back to life. So we've seen today the chariots of fire that separated Elijah and Elisha, and how Elisha became the next prophet. We saw the special miracle where he took care of this one widowed woman, and we've seen this miracle where he brings a dead boy back to life and back to his mother. All right? So we see how Elisha was constantly showing people to God. Now, why was he so good at being a prophet? What was it about him that made him different that we can apply to our lives here today? Any idea? Now, you could say it was those 20 years he spent following Elijah around, and that was probably pretty good. But I think it had more to do with what we saw when Elijah called Elisha. What did he do? He gave up what he was going to do, gave up everything he could to follow God, and that let him study and do exactly what he needed to do to be where God wanted him to be. Hopefully we can do that with our lives. Give up the things that are holding us back. Sometimes they might even be a good thing. And do what we need to follow God and do what he wants us to do. Well, next week we will meet again. We will see another one of Elisha's miracles. And matter of fact, we're hoping to do something special next week. So be sure to watch. I'm hoping to bring in some of my puppets. We're going to tell the story with the puppets next week just to do something different and to think about the stories in a different way. So I hope you can join us for that. And for now, I will pray before we go. Heavenly Father, we thank you we can still do our lessons this way. Be with us that we can hopefully get back together here soon and be a regular Sunday school class again. Be with the kids as they are home, that they still want to serve you the best way they can while they're there. Continue to be with our church as it makes decisions and how and when we can get back together here and what we need to work out to do that. In thy name, amen.